Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Manic Pixie Dream Podcast. I'm your host, Caroline Georges, and for today's episode, we have my dad, and his name is Richard, and he's a really great guy. He raised me. Anyways, he works for the prison system, in Alaska, working with some serial killers, so he has some interesting stories surrounding his experiences with those individuals, and he also was in an abusive marriage to a different kind of psychopath. And so I think it's important for people to recognize that abusive marriages don't always affect women. Sometimes the victims of abusive relationships and marriages are men. And my father is an example of that. And I hope that his insights into that situation are really helpful to any men who might want to watch this episode. Anyways, I hope you have a lovely day and enjoy the episode. Have a lovely day again. Bye. So Dad, tell us about your ex-wife.
Well,
Okay.
was
Okay. So this has to be like.
so I was married. I was married to for about 3 years, but I only lived with her about 11 months.
Yeah.
And during that time, I left like twice.
Yeah.
But finally, I'll always remember she had this ex partner who was never really a partner except like platonically.
Yeah.
Except for a couple occasions. So anyway, Phil moved in with us.
I know.
Yeah.
So you were living in this 2-bedroom house.
Yeah.
Her 2 daughters, and then you were.
I slept on a love seat in the living room.
Okay.
And Bill slept in the garage, on a cot, in a like a service room.
Okay, so what was it like being married to a sociopath? That's what everyone wants to know. What was it like being married to an absolute sociopath?
I mean, this could sum it up in a way. It's like I was commiserating with my boss, who was the corrections commissioner.
Okay.
And when I first told him, I said, "Well, she's moving Bill in."
Yeah.
And he looked at me and he goes, "Oh God, what happens if the governor finds out?" And I was upset. So anyway, that was. Yeah, so I had this. I don't know if you knew this.
Okay.
But I spent about 6 months trying to move my job to Anchorage, figuring that if my job was moved to Anchorage,
then you wouldn't have to be around your crazy ex-wives, your crazy daughters.
She was still my wife.
Your crazy stepkids.
She was still my wife at that point.
Okay.
And I was thinking that maybe she wouldn't be so interested in me. Keeping me around because she liked the paycheck.
Yeah.
And
so you thought if you got another job, then it would be like, oh, well, we need to move and leave. Go
yeah. The first time I realized I'd made a huge mistake was like the day after our wedding.
Okay.
And we were doing a little dog walk.
Yeah.
On Rainbow Row.
Day after your wedding.
Yeah. And she spent the entire half hour of the dog walk criticizing my grammar. And I'm a journalist.
Yeah.
So my grammar is pretty darn good.
Yeah.
But anyway, every time I hear somebody end a sentence with a preposition, I always think of that moment,
Yeah. Jeez. Well, what's a preposition?
At.
Yeah.
Or it's, I don't know what a preposition is, but I know she didn't like it when I ended a sentence with a preposition. I've always been a writer. I don't know what a noun or verb is.
Oh yeah, I do creative writing exercises sometimes.
But I know what sounds right and what doesn't sound right.
Yeah, exactly.
I grew up with sort of literary parents, so I good grammar was always kind of a point.
But you knew that any woman who makes fun of your grammar probably isn't the one, right?
No, it's just that what it was is it was a psychologically abusive relationship.
Yeah.
And the further I got into it, then you start. I remember the first time I left, I moved out, and just temporarily because I was trying to get some concessions and like to be treated nicely,
Yeah.
And so I moved out, and I remember the first thing I worried about was who was going to put the garbage out Monday.
Oh.
So I really because I
Well, you
enjoy
really cared about her kids, Summer
Yeah.
and Bella. And
Yeah.
you really loved them, and they were really important people to you.
Yeah, they are, and I mean, I don't see Bella ever now.
Yeah.
She's kind of on her mom's. You know, it'd be sort of like Czechoslovakia seeing the United States in the 50s.
Yeah.
So, but Summer, I see her, and she sees Bella, and so we stay sort of connected a little bit.
Yeah.
I still have a soft spot in my heart for I mean, there's no question about that.
Why?
Because I'm loyal to family, and I just have this sense of loyalty, and you know, I mean, you know, there's always the argument that when you make the marriage vows, you say for richer or poorer, but you know, it doesn't mean you have to be treated like an idiot.
Yeah.
And the reason why I say that is because it was within power to make changes. And I would still be there if she would have made some changes. I could have put up with a lot.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I just mean that you put up a lot with me. So I mean,
Oh well, that's I mean, you're family too, you know.
Yeah.
And so I don't really put up with that much.
Where do you think your ideas about loyalty and family come from?
I don't know. I was always very loyal. I was loyal to the Yankees when I was like 9 and 10.
That's true. Do you want to tell the story about how you almost murdered Uncle Matthew?
Oh, when you made fun of the Yankees?
Yeah. This is a funny story, actually. Tell the story.
Yeah. Well, I don't remember it that well, but I remember, yeah, he made fun of the Yankees and we didn't talk for a couple weeks. And the Yankees were good to be made fun of at that time.
Yeah, because they went through a phase where they were like,
terrible.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, in the late 60s, early 70s.
And that's when you were growing up?
Yeah, so I used to, he still remembers, I would, when the Yankees would lose, I would hide in my attic. And then I think at the time I got mad at him, he was making fun of the Yankees, and I threw my transistor radio at him out the window. But anyway.
Yeah. So you were throwing your transistor radio out the window to kill Uncle Matthew, even though...
No, just to get his
even
attention. Yeah.
Okay.
So,
Did he ever make fun of the Yankees again after that?
Probably, but I got over it.
Okay, good. What made you get over it?
Well, I was making fun of them too.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, we were loyal. We would. I mean, this is the thing. You know, back in the day, you could go to Yankee Stadium. You could spend $7 and get decent, very good tickets.
Yeah.
And
well, we went to a game once. Remember?
Yeah, it was a playoff game.
Yeah, remember the Marble Man?
Oh yeah.
Oh geez, that was so funny. The Marlboro Man. Remember that guy?
Yes.
Okay, so like there are these like diehard fans, and they're like famous. They're like celebrity baseball fans, and they have like names, and like people recognize them, you know, and people look for them, and they'll be up in like the
bleachers.
Yeah, and so this guy who was sitting in the row over from us, and he's the Marlboro Man, and he's like. Has like Fabio blonde hair.
Oh,
he's,
yeah.
like, short and stocky and
Yeah.
stuff, like middle aged. But he like whenever it's like a song would start playing, he would like stand up and just like start running up and down the stairs, like
Yes.
clapping his hand and like doing dances and stuff.
Yeah.
And I kind of watched him way more than I watched the game, I think.
Yeah, because it's fun to watch and
Yeah.
and I mean I remember when we would go to the Yankees back in the day. There was always this thing where you'd pay the minimum price ticket, and then we kids, you know, we were like in our teens. We had this impression because it had been passed down from generation to generation that if you slip the ticket guy a $5 bill or a $10 bill, he'll send you to really good seats.
Really?
Yeah, so I remember doing that, and somehow or other we'd always end up in worse seats than we would have paid for anyway. But we never really put two and two together.
Yeah.
So that was, yeah.
You married? Go
Well, we met on Match.com.
You met on Match.com. This is not
Yeah.
like a knock against Match.com.
No, and it was,
No.
and the thing is, here's the thing about Match.com.
Yeah.
Which I learned from this lesson is everybody lies.
Yeah.
So in Juneau, which is a small town,
Yes.
so I was on Match.com back in 2010 when I met. So recently, I got another subscription to Match.com.
Okay, good.
Yep.
You're giving it another chance.
At 2017, and it's the same people. And they're always like, have a great sense of humor. And they always love being outdoors hiking. And they love Juneau because it's outdoors. And, they're sitting on their couch watching Netflix.
Yeah.
Which is what I do.
Yes. And so what made you decide you wanted to marry her? She got married. Okay, so
what I wanted is that you guys were out of the house.
Yeah.
Lily was.
Well, because this happened, and I met when I was I met her when she had that breakfast for me leaving.
Right.
When you had that funeral for me.
Funeral.
You remember? You threw me awake.
Oh, okay. Yes. I remember it mostly as a breakfast.
Yeah. Well, you called it awake. And anyways, but she made cinnamon rolls and stuff, and she seemed really nice, and she was really quiet. And I remember Bella and Summer, and they were like this, "Hello, Caroline, would you like some soup?" And I was like, "Sure." And they were like, "Okay, we'll come make some from scratch." And they start pouring water in this pot, and they start making chicken soup from scratch. And I remember being like, did they just ask me if I want chicken soup so they could show me that they know how to make it from scratch? It seemed like a showing off thing. You know what I mean? I don't know how to describe it, but I remember thinking that was really bizarre. And
well, I don't think I don't think they were showing off. I think that it was kind of their mom's.
But yeah, it was just weird. Because you didn't really think, because it was just one of those things. It was like a still water, kind of thing where everything seemed eerily calm. Everything seemed very Stepford Wivey.
Yeah,
it was yeah, exactly. But I remember being happy when you told me you were getting married, even though it was after a month of knowing her. And I remember really wanting you to find somebody and stuff. And
yeah, and that was my motivation. Was I wanted a family. Not a family. I had a family, but I wanted to be able to raise kids and help with that and be part of a. We took a sort of a honeymoon to the East Coast.
Yeah,
and we went to the Philadelphia Art Museum, and there's a picture, and I still have it. I found it the other day of me and Summer and Bella, and it was like one of these classic family photos. I was standing there, and everybody was smiling, and that was just exactly what I was looking for. But it wasn't to be,
Yeah,
and. I had to, I was very controlling. And then I saw a therapist, which I got in trouble for seeing. Big trouble. And
you got in big trouble for seeing a therapist. I remember that because I was,
yeah. And then
everyone was trying to get you to go to see one and stuff. And then you finally decided, it was crazy because you never went to really much of a therapy person before and stuff. And then when it became a rebellious thing, a retaliating against her thing, that's when you sought out therapy.
No, I wasn't. I don't think it was really that. I think it was I desperately needed to see a therapist.
Really? And that was just kind of what made it happen. You just know.
Yeah, because I knew I was in trouble. I mean, I knew that this was not a sustainable operation, and what
were some of the? Well, I mean, she. I remember you and I would talk on the phone and stuff, and I remember you would just be like, everything's great, kids are great, I'm so great, and I'd be like, okay, but it's weird, your relationship with actually brought me and Lily, my sister, closer, because then I would be like, okay, great, Dad, I'm so glad you're happy and stuff, but I think that there was something wrong, and then I would call Lily, and then she'd be like, Caroline, I don't go over anymore, and I was like, why? And she's like, because I don't want to see Dad's dead body. I don't want to see Dad murdered, And I was like, what do you mean? And she's just like, it's crazy. It's going to kill him. And it was, and then it was just hearing that from Lily and just kind of me and Lily comforting each other and stuff and kind of.
It wouldn't have killed me. You know why?
Because of the crawl space?
No.
Okay.
Because she was too worried about her reputation in the community. So murdering a husband wouldn't have fit well with her social standing.
That's true. Okay, you know what? That's actually a really good point.
Yeah, I mean,
why did you just tell me that?
I didn't think of it until recently.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
But Lily and I kind of got closer. You know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, there was a crawl space, and I noticed the crawl space.
And you put a burner phone in there just in case?
I was going to.
Oh.
I never did, but...
but you had a crawl space.
Well, the problem with putting the burner phone in there is that I would have had to go down there, and I wouldn't have wanted to. It was in this hall closet. There was like under the carpet. There was an entryway, and Phil would go down there from time to time. See, when Phil was around, my safety was more insured.
Really?
Yeah, because she can't murder both of us. And then if one of them's murdered, then they're going to have to explain to the other where the other one went.
Yeah. But then again, I mean, I was kind of worried. When Phil moved in, I'll be honest, I thought it was going to be like this to die for situation. You know,
the best example of what I could say about Phil is when I was talking to my boss, the commissioner, he was, I would always say like, well, yeah, he's living there, you know. And then I would always pause and go like, well, at least I like him.
What's Phil doing nowadays?
Phil is a home health worker.
Oh, good.
We can meet for coffee once a week or so.
In his storage unit?
No, at Heritage.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Sorry.
He used to live in a storage unit. He also used to live in a culvert pipe. But you know what? It's one of these things where as he's moved on, and I give him credit for that. But he is a good friend. And he's a good friend.
Why have I not met him? I know so much about this guy.
You'll have to meet him.
I haven't even seen a photo of him. I don't even know what he looks like.
Yeah, he started out in life as a teenager, a homeless teen.
Okay, good.
And
love it. Homeless teen.
And then, his mom was disabled, so she was in a wheelchair. So he grew up I guess it's not an easy thing, like cleaning up after her and stuff like that, you know. So and then his dad either left or died when he was a young teenager, and his dad was actually a very noted wildlife photographer in Alaska. Yeah.
Okay.
So anyway, he moved to Connecticut, and that's where he met Shelley. She's from Connecticut, and so anyway, he was a motorcycle gang member.
Wait, this was Phil?
Yeah, Phil.
I thought this was a psychiatrist.
No, that's another story.
Oh, okay.
This is Phil. Phil was in a motorcycle gang.
So Phil was also in a motorcycle gang.
And he goes, and I remember one time he said, because he was a teenager, she used to hang out with some of them. And that's how Phil met her.
Oh.
And he goes, well, I'll tell you, we were a real bunch of assholes, but nobody was as much of an asshole as
What would she do?
I don't know. She would just like make fun of everybody and stuff. And she dated or went out with whatever, a bunch of different ones. And then she'd work one against the other and create havoc and turmoil and stuff.
Oh, God. Okay.
That's the story I heard from Phil anyway.
All right. Well, Phil's great.
Phil is a good man. He told me one time that, because he was very loyal to the girls, and he loved I mean, he should have married she didn't want anything to do with him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you worked for the prison system. You're retired.
Alaska Department of Corrections.
Yeah.
15 years.
So you worked with some prolific...
No, 10 years.
Yeah. So you worked with some prolific murderers.
Serial killers. Well, I didn't work with them. We weren't colleagues. But I
like to think so.
Yeah. Well, probably the one I remember most is Robert Hansen, who was the butcher baker.
Okay, so Robert Hansen, he was famous for hunting girls, like 15-year-old prostitutes.
He would capture prostitutes off the street. This was during pipeline days. Mm-hmm. And I lived through pipeline days in Fairbanks when they called it 2 Street.
Okay.
And there were all these hookers from L.A., supposedly. That was the rumor, at least, that had come up to make a ton of money off the oil field workers. And, I mean, it was like the gold rush, except in sort of different terms.
Mm-hmm.
But so anyway, there was a lot of street workers, sex workers, and they were young and didn't have much protection, and especially in the winter when it was very cold. So Robert Hansen would pick them up and then take them to his airplane. He had a plane, and then he would fly them into the wilderness, let them out, and then hunt them. I mean, it was a matter of like minutes.
So Alaska has all these like lone islands that are like.
Well, he took them out on the Matanuska River, Knik.
Okay.
And then there's a lot of gravel bars, sandbars in the middle of these braided rivers. And he let them, and they had like willows and like low growing willows on them and stuff like that, so you could kind of hide a little bit, but and interestingly, his downfall was a trophy, a mounted trophy head.
Really?
Of a sheep, yeah. Because what happened is he scammed the insurance company, and
what insurance company?
Oh, I don't know, whoever insured his house.
Okay.
And then as a robbery, and then he collected like $10,000 when all his trophy heads were stolen. See, so but what happened is that he was scamming. So they weren't stolen; they were right there. He just hid them for a while and then put them back up. So when the police first had an inkling that he might have been a serial killer, they sent an officer to check on him.
Okay.
And they spotted the heads up in his little secret man cave.
The heads, the
trophy heads.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so these
are of animals, not of people.
Yeah, animals. Yeah, so somebody put two and two together that was an insurance scam. So that gave them the permission, the warrant, the search warrant.
Sure.
To go into the house, and then that's when they found the trophies from the girls. So then they knew
what were from the girls?
From the girls he killed, like jewelry and stuff.
Oh, right.
Yeah. So and then there was a few bodies buried down there and stuff like that. It always cracks me. It doesn't crack me up, but it always amazes me. And I mean, I think there's got to be somebody's done a research paper on it of wives of serial killers who don't notice anything wrong.
Yeah, that's always so bizarre to me. Why do you think that is?
Well, I mean, I didn't notice anything wrong with Shelley for a while, but I mean, she's not a serial killer, but I guess you get into a certain mode and you just don't want to see things, so.
Well, you worked with Robert Hansen, this guy.
Well, I didn't work with him, but I was my official title was Special Assistant to the Commissioner. So I have a journalism background. So I did the media.
So there's this movie called The Frozen Ground.
Yes, with John Cusack, and who else was in that?
Nicolas Cage.
Yes.
And so John Cusack was cast to play Robert Hansen.
So I was working for the Department of Corrections, and they were making this movie, and
John Cusack's agent contacted the department because John Cusack wanted to have like a visiting hour with Robert Hansen.
Right.
And but they're not going to like fly down and just like show up and ask to talk to him. So they wanted to arrange something.
Yes, that's right.
And then, so you wanted to. So you went.
So the commissioner sent me down to the prison. He was at a place called Spring Creek Correctional Center, where he was the prison barber.
Yes.
And
was he a nice guy? I mean, like,
No, I mean he was. I was nervous about being in a room with him and barbering tools.
Yeah. But you're not a prostitute.
Well, he was a model prisoner.
Really?
Yeah, he had earned a lot of privileges, and
well, that's so bizarre to me. Why do you think that is? It's so common where somebody can just be this total heinous person, but once they're in like a correctional facility, they just like end up being like perfect.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess perfect.
I think it's because they think things through. Whether it's murdering a girl.
Really?
Yeah, so they're intelligent.
Really think that, so they process it.
They process it. So then they realize when they get to prison that they're going to be a target. So they just stay out of the way. And that's how Hansen did it. He just stayed out of everybody's way. He was the loner. And then he slowly began, as you build up time, you earn credits. Mm-hmm. I mean, not credit, but you earn privileges. So he became the barber. And that was a sort of a good privilege because you have a job and you your day isn't boring. And I mean, it's probably a little bit boring, but and then the other interesting thing is that if I remember right, he got a visit from his son once a month.
Really?
Through it the whole time till he died.
No.
So his son was a teenager when this all came down, and then was an adult when he was visiting. But anyway, I had a chance to. So the commissioner sent me down to Seward to see him because we also wanted to ask him. There was a lot of media attention because I believe it was the anniversary of the like his 60th birthday or something, and then the movie was coming out. So I asked him if I said, hey, I introduced myself, explained why I was there, and asked if he wanted any contact with the media or with the agent. And he said no. And that's all he said. And I said, okay.
Just no.
No.
But you had to try and explain to him who John Cusack was, and he was just confused and didn't give a shit who John Cusack was.
I don't remember that. I think that prisoners have access to, news and
really?
Magazines and newspapers and stuff. I think my impression is that he knew who it was, probably because somebody would have told him, like the superintendent would stop by and chat with him and stuff and let him know that there was a movie coming out and stuff. So that would have happened.
Okay.
But Robert Hansen, he was sort of smallish guy.
Yeah.
And
it's always the little ones.
Yeah. Well, when I first worked for the Department of Corrections, we had a deputy commissioner who was a female, a woman, and she remembers she was like myself, had no corrections background, so I was a political appointee. So because I'd worked on campaigns and stuff.
Yeah.
So she said the biggest surprise that she had when she first went into a prison was that the inmates were not what she expected. That she describes them as being little and scruffy. So instead of like big hulking characters like you get in the movies.
Yeah.
So the thing that I've learned, I learned working at the Department of Corrections is it's actually very hard to go to prison.
Really?
I mean, they don't want you there if you're like a minor criminal because you take up space, you take up food, you take up attention, you can get worse. So they'd rather have you out. So they're going to do whatever they can do unless you're doing something heinous or something violent. They're going to look for ways to keep you out of jail.
Yeah.
Send you to a halfway house or...
So you said that there's two kinds of prisoners.
Yeah. Well, I got this from my boss, who's Joe Schmidt, who's a very wise man. He said there's two kinds of prisoners. There's prisoners we're mad at and prisoners we're afraid of.
Who are the prisoners we're like mad at?
Well, we're mad at like the drug dealers and people that steal cars and people that are on, opiates, have addictions. And then we're afraid of, serial killers, sex offenders.
Do you think that there should be two different kinds of programs?
Well, in some extent there is. And this is where the prisoners we're mad at, the dangerous ones, are in isolation sometimes. And there's a lot of controversy about that.
Yeah, for sure.
They're trying to get rid of isolation. And I think that's probably a good idea. The problem is that it's a tool that is needed because you have prisoners that have killed their cellmates. And so,
or there's that, you were telling me about, there was this inmate who had HIV or AIDS and he got a razor blade.
Oh yeah.
So what happened to him?
I don't know what happened to him, but I remember he tried to get infected. One of the correctional officers.
Oh no.
Yeah, or his roommate. I mean, he was using it as a weapon. He was throwing it. So there's some bizarre things that I've heard about. For example, prisoners at the maximum security facility that are in isolation.
Yeah.
They will weave their own hair into little ropes.
Okay.
And then they flick them under the door.
Yeah.
And try to reach other cells with little notes.
Let's say what?
They are often successful, and their notes are in code or tiny lettering.
Code?
Yeah. There's prison codes, or like.
What do you think the codes say, or like what do you think the notes say when you find them?
Oh, I don't know. I wouldn't even want to speculate. I mean, they
really
probably start in trouble of some sort, or so and so's a snitch, or I don't know, something like that.
Michelle Linehan. Can we talk about?
Yeah,
that?
I met Michelle Linehan. I was involved with her. A little background: she was a stripper in Anchorage during the Pipeline days. At the same time Robert Hansen was doing his thing, maybe a little bit later. And she was very pretty, and she was sort of interesting because the way she was described, she was the stripper that made the most money, and she almost never took her clothes off. And what she was good at was talking to guys. And so she ended up in some sort of love triangle between one guy whose name I don't remember and another guy whose name I don't remember.
Okay. So which murder victim and then perpetrator?
All right. So, and there was another, there was three, I believe.
Three guys?
Three guys, I believe.
So there was the father and the son and then the boyfriend.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Okay. So those are the three.
So the one of them conspired with Michelle supposedly to murder the other one.
But her name was on the life insurance.
Yes.
So she got this guy to put her name on the life insurance.
Yeah, or on property or something.
Yeah.
And he was yeah. So then the other guy who was sort of a victim of it, he was murdered in jail.
Yeah.
And I remember I was around when that happened, and boy, we had to do some media scrambling during that whole time.
Yeah.
So anyway, so what happened is that there was this murder, and I don't think she was involved. Well, one of the superintendents put it best.
What?
He said, I don't think she murdered the person directly, but she knows more than she's ever let on. Mm-hmm. So because there was no real reason to murder this person.
Well, a lot of money.
Yeah, I mean, but she was making money anyway, and I always kind of defended her.
I know, because you were in love with her. Everyone was. Like, everyone was in love with her. That's what I remember. You had such a big crush on her.
Yeah, no, she was...
it was like, oh, Michelle Linehan is so beautiful.
Well, the superintendent of was Highland Mountain Correctional Center, was the women's prison. Mm-hmm. And the first time she came in, she was doing a Nightline.
Yeah.
Or I don't know if it was Nightline, but it was some one of those Dateline.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I saw that episode.
So I was involved because I was the one that was the media liaison. Uh-huh. So I was the one that went to the prison and calmed everybody down and brought the TV cameras into the secure area of the prison and stuff. Mm-hmm. So the first time Michelle walked in when she was first incarcerated, the superintendent, who was this really nice guy, he was like an older man. Mm-hmm. He looked at her and he goes, "Oh, somebody's going to jail before she leaves here." And then he looked at me and goes, "Maybe it'll be you."
Oh, jeez.
So, but so anyway, she and there's a lesson that she could teach people.
Yes, this is very important.
And that is that when state troopers or detectives come to your house and you're married to a doctor and you have a business and you have everything like that, and they say, "Hey, we're doing a little bit of we have a cold case on this murder, and we just wanted to get your impressions of what happened."
Yeah.
And at that point, you say, like, "We'll meet at my attorney's office." But she went ahead and started flapping her mouth.
Oh, geez.
And sort of incriminated herself.
What did she say?
I don't know. It was not anything specific. It was just more in general. And
the case had one piece of evidence that...
It was the gun.
No, it wasn't the gun. It was the movie. That movie.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
And
yes.
And it was really controversial that they used this as evidence.
That was the only evidence they really had.
That was that she was a fan of this movie.
Yeah.
And it was, what was it? It was like To Die For. It was like that movie with Nicole Kidman where Nicole Kidman convinces her student to kill her husband. Mm. but it's not. It's like a different. It's like a Lifetime movie that's sort of like.
Yeah, this was a Lifetime movie.
Yeah, it was a Lifetime movie with the girl. I think she was from Law and Order, the woman from Law and Order. So when she was super young, she was in like this 1980s Lifetime movie about a girl who convinces this guy to kill another guy, and it was like Michelle's favorite movie. And she owned it. She owned a copy of this movie.
Yes.
And then that was the evidence that they had against her because she was a fan of this movie.
Yeah, and the other evidence they had, there was another piece of evidence, and that was the guy who was killed, who was murdered, had written a letter to his family. He was from a rich family in Michigan.
Okay.
And they said, if anything ever happens to me, it's Michelle Linehan that did it.
Oh.
So, and
okay, well then that's
there was no correlation. In other words, that's all he said, but he never, there was no, that didn't add anything it was just a suspicion, So they used that in the trial. So, she was convicted the first time and went to prison. So this was the appeal.
And it was every single person on the jury was a woman as well.
Yeah, something like that. I don't remember.
Or it was mostly women.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, that sounds right. So she got a better lawyer because what she did was I think she winged it the first time. She didn't really take it serious. She didn't think anything would happen. Then she got convicted and got sentenced to 40 years. And then she appealed. And they went to the Supreme Court and they accepted her appeal based on the fact that they had no real evidence. And then the state decided to, I don't know if they retried it or if they just let the charges drop. But
there was
They threw out a bunch of evidence, like they couldn't use the movie and they couldn't use the Supreme Court rules.
Well, that was such a bizarre. I don't know. When you read about court cases and stuff, there's always something like a little funky that happens because it's like people are people, you know what I mean? But it's just so weird that like they would just like screen a movie for a jury, that like a jury was watching this fucking Lifetime movie.
Yeah.
To
See,
like,
they didn't, and they threw that out.
Yeah, that's ridiculous.
So, anyway, the lesson from this whole thing is if you're visited by police detectives, get your lawyer.
Yep.
Don't say anything, even if you totally didn't do it.
Right.
And you have nothing to even worry about. I wouldn't ever talk to law enforcement about anything unless I had a lawyer.
Okay.
Because they could twist things.
Yeah.
And anyway, the last time I saw Michelle Linehan, she was married to a doctor and he was very loyal. He stood by her the whole time. And I don't think she did it.
Really?
No. I don't.
Why not?
There just wasn't that much evidence, and there was a whole thing about where she was, because this shooting was done out in the wilderness south of Anchorage, and she had no reason. That was I think.
You know what? This is what I think. I think it's like I don't know. I think maybe like drugs get into it. You start doing coke and you start drinking and stuff. And I know girls that are like that. And
apparently she was really careful about that.
Really?
Yeah, she was very careful. She was very knowledgeable. And that my impression was that she was really careful because she knew the road could take her a bad place if she started getting into that. So,
but still, I just wonder if it was like one of those things where it's like, you know what? Maybe this guy getting killed and me being on his life insurance wouldn't be the worst thing. Maybe I can just sort of try my place my bets and see what happens.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? That's kind of what I think happened. Yeah. I don't think it would have made that big of a difference to her if it didn't happen. But I thought, well, what do I have to lose? Maybe if I just sort of, hey, I'm on this guy's life insurance. Maybe he disappeared, and she just kind of like drops that bomb, walks away, I don't know. Like sometimes like I think maybe that's what she did, honestly. Like she was 19, you know what I mean? It's not like.
Yeah, that's true.
And she was in a pretty, the environment that she's in, they're not the kind of people that are like thinking about feelings,
Well, she was always, I think she'd bought property and she'd saved her money and.
Okay.
She, I don't know. I don't think anybody, I think that probably the one thing that the deputy commissioner said that I quoted before, I think, is that I don't know if she did it, but she did something.
Yeah, that's what I think.
Or she knows more than she lets on.
Yeah.
Or she knew what was good. She knew if she didn't do it, she knew about it. So, because she had 3 jealous. And I can't remember the guy's name that got killed, but he was the one that was in jail for life.
I just think she just started spinning a web like it was nothing, and shit went down, and it just kind of didn't work out in her favor, you know?
Yeah, and she did prove herself to be kind of arrogant by talking to the troopers without a lawyer.
Yeah.
Because she was smart enough to know that you probably, especially if you were even vaguely involved.
I know. Yeah, and it's kind of like that hiding in plain sight thing, you know? It's like, well, I mean, because it's like if she were to have called a lawyer, that would have been so suspicious, you know? Maybe she was just like, well, if I seem really open and honest.
Well, right, and that's what she did. And then it backfired on her.
Yeah. You were a single dad raising 2 daughters.
Yes.
What was that like?
It was fun. I always really enjoyed it, you know, except when I was smashing phones against it. But I mean, what I really liked was we went on trips.
Yeah. What about the wall of silence? Should we talk about that one?
In the van?
Yeah.
Oh, we took a road trip across country.
Okay, this is when you Lily were little.
Yeah.
And then, so Lily and I would fight.
You guys would fight. You guys always fought.
Mm-hmm. And then, so what did you do?
So, and I would give this as a parenting tip.
Okay.
We had this van.
Okay.
It was a 1990 Chevy Lumina van, APV, which ended up with 313,000 miles.
Ooh.
Yep. I remember when it finally died, you couldn't steer it anymore. Other than that, it was fine. But anyway.
I remember when it was on its last legs and it was the most beat up van. And so what were we doing? But Brandon was in Miranda and me, and then our German exchange student were all in this van. And then the brakes.
Oh, yeah, there was never any brakes on that van, yeah. Yeah, brakes were an option.
Luckily, there was that on the hill. There was that thing that went uphill. So
good.
Luckily that was there.
I remember that German exchange student.
I know she probably.
It's the brakes.
She remembers you. She remembers that.
So anyway, so what I did was, and I think it was a clever move, is there was 2 rows of back seats. So I put Lily and Caroline in the farthest row back, and then piled all the luggage and camping gear and stuff in the middle, so I could drive in peace. And then I think the worst one was they got into a milk fight.
Okay, so you got us McDonald's, and then you put the McDonald's back there.
Kind of like you feed a bear.
Yeah, and then so you gave us McDonald's.
You slide open the door and put the food in and slide the door shut. It's like the prison system. It's like this. The tray came.
So you gave me and Lily our food, shut the van door. I was locked back there with her. It was like I forget what happened, but I think she poured her milkshake on me. Then I defended myself with throwing French fries at her and stuff.
Yeah, milkshakes outrage French fries though.
Yeah, and then you, yeah.
What did I do?
I don't know. You just drove in peace, listening to, I don't know, music. I guess, not realizing.
Yeah.
Lily was trying to murder me with food.
Yeah, you guys had some moments.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, being a single dad is, it's, I mean, I wasn't really a single dad because your mom helped out a lot.
Yeah.
And your mom was there. And of course,
but you guys weren't together. And
no.
I think that does make things a lot harder, you know?
Yeah, and I never had a girlfriend or anything because in Texas I did.
Mm-hmm.
But I always remember having you guys. Well, I remember. So I worked at a newspaper, the Amarillo Globe News, after I lost my job at the Juneau Empire, and so I always remember the one night that we had this little house.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, we heard somebody trying to do a home invasion on the back door.
Oh yeah, that was so scary.
I know. So I got a hold of 911, turned the lights out, hid behind the counters, and then
the police came.
The police came, and then I get this phone call, and they said, "You can lock your screen door now." Yeah. So
no, you weren't.
But anyway, it was fun, and then you and Lily got into fights, and I remember one time coming home, looking through the window, and you guys had the hide a bed as an airplane. and you had it up in the air.
Oh yeah, I remember that.
Banging it down and stuff. And
yeah, because it was like we used it as sort of like so if you folded it up and then jumped on it, then the other side would go up.
yes.
And then you would fly up and stuff. So it was kind of like one of those. Yeah, it was that was a lot of fun.
And then I would stick you guys in the public pool for a day. Well, I had to work.
Yeah, it was. I know you did have to work, but still, like being at like a pool, like a public pool for 5 hours.
And then I got a babysitter. I remember this. I got a.
Oh yeah.
And it was another teenager, and they turned you into slaves. I remember that.
I do too. Yeah. Well, I'm glad that I'm glad that we moved back, or that everything went back to Alaska. Went back to normal. Texas wasn't it?
Yeah, that was a great moment when I got hired up in Fairbanks, and we could all take off, and we took the van. That was another road trip, and we. I remember dropping you off in at the ferry in Skagway, and then I went on up to Fairbanks, and then that's how I got back to Juneau, was when I worked for Jeanette James.
Yeah, that was a really good summer. I remember that.
I liked my job at the Department of Corrections. I had been a sports writer for 15 years at the Juneau Empire.
Yeah.
And, I met some interesting people writing sports. Did you ever?
Well, you
So the most interesting person I met as a sports writer was Kenny Sailors.
Who's that?
Kenny Sailors was this guy. He was the girls basketball coach at Angoon, which is a little native village. And he was a bear hunting guide.
Okay.
And he was in his 80s.
Sure.
So first time I noticed him was when he was running practices at the Southeast tournament with his girls. And he was playing them 1-on-5.
Yeah.
And beating them.
Yeah.
Because he was real wiry. So it turns out he invented the jump shot. Which is the classic jump shot, in basketball. And he was the first person to use it. And he played for the NBA Celtics back in the 1940s. So, and he was now as a bear hunting guide in Alaska. And, but he won national tournaments. He played for the University of Wyoming, the only year they won the national title. And, so anyway, he was an interesting guy, very nice guy. He told me, and I always remember this, that he had been diagnosed with terminal cancer, but he lived with it for almost 20 years.
Terminal cancer for 20 years?
Yep. And he said the reason why was he ate this strict vegetarian diet and took these Chinese herbal medicine that he ordered, through somewhere that he had. They came in little powders. And he swore by them. And was as healthy as you could see. But he said every time he goes back to the doctor, they would say, yeah, you got cancer.
Really?
So it wasn't like it was in remission, but it wasn't cured. But it was held at bay, and it never affected him.
He was an athlete?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So I always remember that about Kenny Sailors. And
That's really cool.
the other person I met at the Juneau Empire was Tommy Chong of Cheech and Chong fame.
Oh, okay. What was that like?
Well, he was in town to do a stand-up thing, and so
Juneau does that a lot. They have like stand-up comedians and stuff come to.
Yeah, Juneau just had Tig Notaro.
Yeah, you told me something that your therapist said to you about leaving, and that I was hoping that.
Yeah, and I had this therapist.
That hated you seeing.
Yeah, that was the first one, and she was a woman therapist. I can't remember her name. I see her around town from time to time, and she was very new age, and and she's the one that showed me the cycle of abuse.
Yeah,
there's a wheel, and it's got like Anyway, but this is another therapist that I saw named Larry Olson, and he was a retired Lutheran minister, and so he was. So anyway, when I was with, I developed this anxiety attacks. I'd get these anxiety attacks, and one of the places that it hit me, the first time I realized I was having an anxiety attack was when I was on a flight from Connecticut to Chicago to fly back to Alaska because I was dismissed from my honeymoon. early.
Oh, I remember that. She sent you home from your own honeymoon.
Yeah, early.
Okay, all right, keep it. All right.
And and I had this panic attack sitting next to the window. I felt trapped, and I started climbing over people and freaking out and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So, and it was very much surprising and then after that, I couldn't sit by the window. So I went and saw this therapist, Larry Olson, and I said, I explained to him the situation and asked him if there was any kind of treatment or something like that. And so he looked at me very wisely and consulted a couple of books and stuff like that. And he goes, yes. He goes, the cure for this is to just book an ILC.
Okay, good.
And he goes, everybody has panic attacks by the window these days. But anyway, he told me because I was very torn. I mean, I realized that I had to leave because it was just crazy.
Yeah.
And he told me that I didn't have to. He said, you can do whatever you want.
Yeah.
But he said, the thing you have to remember is this is the rest of your life.
Yeah.
And if you're willing to make that the rest of your life, then you should stay,
Yeah.
And he goes, that wouldn't be a wrong decision. He goes, some people, that's what they want to do. They want to be told what to do. And, and that's fine. I mean, you don't have to take any bad feelings about that. But if you don't want that to be the rest of your life, then you need to leave. And I said, I need to leave. And he goes, well, it's going to take a lot of courage. And it was kind of a process. We ended up staying married. I moved out, and then we ended up getting legally separated because at the time when I worked for the state, I had insurance that.
She was taking advantage of you.
Well, yeah, she was.
But
I was glad to do it.
No,
because he kept the kids on the
you
insurance.
really cared about Summer and Bella. And
I did.
Yeah.
I
That
did.
was really, and you stayed married to their mom for
3 years.
Yeah.
And it cost me.
Yeah.
So.
Because you had to pay for a 3-year marriage instead of 1 year, which makes a difference when you're getting a divorce.
Well, and the other thing was I finally got very nervous because as long as we were married, even legally separated, I couldn't retire. And because she would get a percentage of the retirement. And if something was to happen to me, then you guys wouldn't have gotten any of my estate.
Which would have just been that Evita poster for me, but.
Well, I mean, even if I would have written out a will, I could. The wife always gets the estate.
Oh, geez.
You can't undo that, according to Alaska law.
Yeah.
So. But it's all, I firmly believe that you learn something from everybody you meet.
Yeah.
And it wasn't all bad.
So your hero is the guy, Bear Man. Grizzly Man. Grizzly Man.
Grizzly Man, yeah.
But,
well, anyway, there's, in that movie,
yes.
there's an interesting place where the guy says, the biologist says that the reason why Timothy Treadwell, that was his name, never got attacked by bears is because he was so crazy by being around them.
Yeah.
And that there's an instinctive avoidance of crazy animals by bears because it's a sign of like rabies or some kind of disease.
Yeah.
So they basically thought he was nuts and then didn't want to go near him and eat him, So I have an experience with that myself. When I was out of college, in college, but back for Christmas break, we went to a Devo concert. I remember I went with Maddie and Mike and
Devo.
And so that was during my one brief foray into the world of consuming drugs.
Okay.
And I was not wise. So people would hand me pills and I would just down them.
Okay, good.
And so I don't know what I was taking. Can I tell you the most weirdest drug story?
Yes.
Okay, so when I was up in Fairbanks, I had this friend Tim.
Okay.
And he was always like coming up. Or no, it was this guy Mark Springer. I remember him.
Okay, Mark Springer.
Yeah, so he came up and said, "Hey man, you got to try this stuff." I said, "What is it?" He goes, "It's Thorazine." I said, "What's Thorazine?" He goes, "It's just like horse tranquilizer." So I said, "Sure." So I remember a big brown pill.
Okay.
So I was down playing pinball in the Commons. And then all of a sudden I had this feeling of like, I am very tired now. I must go to bed. So I struggled to walk back to the dorms, which were like 500 feet away. And I remember going up to my dorm room, locking the door, going to bed, and then waking up, and it was like 3 days later. And then my friend Tim, he hitchhiked. He lived in a doghouse out at a place called Quarter Mile.
Okay.
And it was a little log cabin doghouse, and he dug it out. He dug out the floor so that he could stand up in it.
Okay.
And it was maybe the size of this table.
Okay.
Now it's about 4 times, maybe like 4 of these tables.
Okay.
And so he was trying to hitchhike back to there, and it was like 40 below zero.
Oh, geez.
And he kept getting rides and falling asleep. So he'd end up out in Steese, and then he'd come back, and he'd end up in North Pole, and he'd come. He spent the whole night doing that. And then finally he got home. He's the guy, Tim, the famous moment with him was he had a coal stove, a little stove, and you'd get coal back in that day in Fairbanks by the railroad yards because they had coal for the power plant.
Sure.
So you could find little chunks of coal that are falling off the...
Mm-hmm.
So he put coal in there, but instead of putting kerosene in, he put gasoline in. So he lit the stove, and he blew himself out the front door like a cannonball. And
What about the story about the Mormon guy?
oh yeah, Jim.
Okay.
Yeah. So Jim, I was friends with him. Jim, he was this guy. He was like Mr. Party Animal. And okay, so he was famous in our little circle for he picked up these 2 prostitutes.
Okay.
And brought them back to his parents' house.
Okay.
Because his parents were in Germany.
Okay.
And he didn't bother turning on the lights. He opened the bedroom door of his parents, pushed them into the bed, and then there was this screaming. And what he didn't realize was his parents had come home that day, and they were in the bed. And he got in trouble over that. But and another funny story with him is we lived in this place called Dead End Alley.
Okay.
I lived there for 2 semesters.
Okay.
And anybody from Fairbanks will know Dead End Alley. And there's a cinder block house that was in there, and I lived in this Quonset hut.
Okay.
And so there was a party, and Jim was there, and he goes, "Hey, I'm gonna go downstairs and buy some more weed." So everybody's like, "Okay." So while he was down there was this magnitude 6-point-something earthquake.
Oh, geez.
And it shook the whole house, and it was this huge, loud bang. It was like a real quick earthquake. It wasn't like sustained. It was like bam, bam, bam.
Okay.
And I mean, everybody was like, people were like on the floor. So Jim comes up, and he pounds on the door, and he goes, "Did you feel that?" And instinctively, everybody turned to each other and went, "No." "No, feel what?" "There was just a big earthquake." "No." "Jim, are you smoking too much weed?" "No, I felt you had to have felt it. It was like a huge earthquake." And everybody was like, "No, I didn't feel anything." And then somebody started this whole thing about how sometimes people have their own personal earthquake. So there might have been an earthquake just in the spot where you were standing. So anyway, Jim Quinn, he was party animal Jim Quinn. He was always smoking hash and smoking weed, and saying he had long hair and stuff. He was a biology major.
Yeah.
And then this had happened maybe about 3 times. There was like this, like in science, the Earth's magnetic field shifts about every 1,000,000 years. So the poles change. Mm-hmm. And actually we're due for one. But anyway, so Jim would do this change, and all of a sudden you'd see him, and he'd be Elder Quinn of the Latter-day Saints Church. And he would take your coffee away, and he would lecture you about living a good life and stuff. And he had his little badge and stuff, and he was a missionary, and he was like fanatic Jim Quinn of the Latter-day Saints Church. And then that would last. And I remember my first job out of college was in Fairbanks. It was in Ketchikan.
Okay.
I'll tell you about Ketchikan. If you've ever seen the movie Aliens.
Yeah.
So there's a scene where the Space Marines come into that mining town, and the doors are blowing, and it's raining like crazy and stuff.
Yeah.
and it's all dirty and muddy and stuff. And I remember the first time I saw that, I went, that's Ketchikan. Except in Ketchikan, the monsters would be stumbling around drunk and getting into fights in front of the Shamrock Bar with the police. That was my first day. My first job out of college was at the Ketchikan Daily News. And the first morning I spent there, I walked past the Shamrock Bar, and there was a guy beating somebody's head into the curb, and there was blood. And then the cops pull up, and the guy getting his head beaten into the curb jumps up and goes, "Fucking leave my friend alone." And I always remember that. I was Ketchikan. So anyway, what was my main point? It was about aliens. Something to do with aliens.
That was what Ketchikan looked like.
Oh, yeah. But I was getting into something else. Jim Quinn, right. So I got my first job out of college down at Ketchikan. And Jim Quinn happened to get a summer job with the fish and game department doing fish counting or whatever. And he was there. So he gets a hold of me. Mm-hmm. And he had changed back.
Oh, he had changed back into Elder Quinn, or he changed back into...
No, into drunk.
drunk Quinn.
Trying to throw a brick through a window. And then he calls me. So this change happened. I remember this. The first time I met him in Ketchikan, he was like, "You have to go see this."
What?
And I go, "What?" And he goes, "Well, some of the elders from the church are at my apartment, and they really want to show you this film strip."
Ooh.
Remember film strips?
Yeah.
You turn them, and they would go like, they were kind of an old school thing.
Yeah.
So anyway, it was this older man and his wife, and they were like Mormons. I mean, they were like from Utah and stuff.
Okay.
And Jim was like, so they had me there personally, and I finally told him, I said, "I'm not really buying into this stuff."
Yeah.
And then this old man looks at me and goes, "You are going to burn in hell." And I'm like, "I want to go now." And then I remember he followed me out the door going, "Hell burner. You'll burn in hell."
Oh.
So anyway, the next time I ran into Jim Quinn, he was stumbling drunk in downtown Ketchikan. And I was trying to avoid him.
Yeah.
And then he called me on the phone. I had a phone. And he goes, "I'm going to come over and fuck you in the ass." And I was like, I'm very frightened now. And that's the last thing that I ever spoke to Jim Quinn about. And he left.
Can you say that to me?
What?
I don't think you said that into the microphone.
What? Yeah.
Okay. So Elder Jim Quinn.
Yeah. He scared the shit out of me.
Okay. But it's just like, okay, never mind. It's fine.
I can only say that once.
What time did he call you?
Oh, it was like 2 a.m. And so speaking of serial killers, the apartment that I had was in a little house on something street, Creek Street or something in Ketchikan, up on the side of the hill. And it was Tongass Avenue down below and another street up above. And I remember the heating system was you poured oil in a tank outside, and then you threw burning newspaper down to this grating in the floor.
Okay.
And then theoretically the heat would come up. So, but the apartment, my landlord was a guy named Jim Shea.
Okay.
And Jim Shea was the mayor
of
Ketchikan.
Okay.
For years.
Okay.
And he was the head of the local theater group. And they were always doing Our Town or something like that. He was like,
okay.
He was like really into musical theater and stuff like that. So, anyway, he had this bizarre habit, which I noticed, but nobody else did apparently.
Okay.
He would always be at the basketball games, because remember I was a sports writer, so I was covering basketball. Mm-hmm. And he would always be filming the cheerleaders with his little Super 8 camera. So go ahead 10 years, 15 years, and looking at the newspaper, and Jim Shea was arrested. He was like the largest child pornographer ever arrested in Alaska. And he had like 50 million images, many of whom he made himself.
Oh, that's horrible. Oh.
And
oh, geez.
yeah.
But it all started with him with a Super 8 camera filming cheerleaders.
Yeah, and it was sort of funny. It was because this is sort of the classic thing. It's like, well, he's the mayor, you know.
Yeah. Inmate letters. Listen.
Oh,
Oh,
yeah.
yeah. Favorite inmate letters. Okay,
You know,
so you got.
I made a list, and I can't ever find it. But it was outtakes from letters from inmate families to inmates, or letters from the inmates to like the governor or to the commissioner. And on a serious note, I think one of the saddest ones that I read was from the wife of a native elder who had been arrested for raping his own children, or when he was drunk, and this wife was writing in and said, "I know it's what he did was wrong, but he's the provider of our family, and he hunts, and he's the one that brings us our protein for the winter, you know, and we need him, you know."
Oh, geez.
And so, of course, he was serving like 30 years, but it was very hard, you know. It was,
Do they let him out?
No.
Yeah.
No, I mean, they can't, but...
But it's like, what happened to his family?
Yeah, well, I don't know, you know. I mean, It was just in a village, and of course, people share food and stuff like that. But, you know, the men are needed for... everyone has their role.
Yeah, but it's like Harvey Weinstein's needed, you know?
Yeah.
But it's like, what are you going to do? You have to...
Yeah.
I mean, justice is so important, you know?
But there were some funny letters.
Oh, yeah.
Probably the most amazing letter was from a inmate's mom, whose name I won't say. Mm-hmm. And she wrote to the governor, and I'm not making this up.
Oh, geez. What?
I'm not making this up.
I know.
She wrote complaining that her son was not allowed to masturbate.
So, did you write back?
I think we did.
And what did you write?
I think I always remember this. I remember I drafted a letter to bring to the commissioner just to show him.
Okay.
And I was saying, like, dear Miss So-and-so, the reason for this is we are concerned that he's going to grow hair on his palms. And it's a health concern.
Okay.
Well, and in fact, you are allowed to masturbate but you're just not allowed to do it in front of female staff.
Right. They shouldn't have female staff at prisons. Like, that's what's crazy to me.
Oh, actually, you know what? I'll defend that because female staff, because they had one of the most dangerous prisons, and this came up because the correctional officers union was complaining about how dangerous it was for these officers, and this was like a negotiating tactic. Mm-hmm. And I pointed out to my boss, the commissioner. Mm-hmm. I said, "Well, if you happen to notice, the correctional officer of the year is a 67-year-old grandmother." So this is one thing I learned working for the Department of Corrections, is that even the most dangerous inmates aren't that dangerous if you treat them with respect.
Really?
And so that means, if they say, "I'm out of toilet paper," you bring them toilet paper.
Yeah.
And so there was a culture of, people being macho and saying, like, guess you're going to have to just suffer for a while. You know?
Yeah.
So that's what causes trouble. So this woman was known for keeping her word.
Really?
So the inmates protected her and she wasn't like on their side. I mean, she wasn't like bringing them drugs or anything.
Yeah, she was like an ethical.
But she was
employee.
just a person that was fair. You know.
Yeah.
There was an interesting story. I always remember this. Mm-hmm. So we ran this program for a while, giving employee awards and recognition. Yeah. And they'd get like doing this and doing that and most courageous and stuff. So one of the people turned in one about it was a person's husband who was also working as a correctional officer, and there'd been an incident, mm-hmm. and a guard was attacked with a razor blade. Yeah. And so the fact is that this was a little bit bullshit. Yeah. Because the person that rescued the guard was another prisoner, not the other correctional officer. because the other prisoner was there when it happened and grabbed the person's arm and pulled it down and held on to that person until people could show up. So my boss was like, no, we're not.
We're not what?
We're not going to give this correctional officer an award for bravery when he didn't do anything.
There were a lot of failed programs, I remember, from growing up that you guys would try. And shit would sound really great, and then you would abandon it, and then it wouldn't work and stuff. I mean, I think the dog training thing was like the only thing that I remember being successful.
Yeah, the dog training thing was, I was really very proud of being involved with that.
Yeah.
So they had female prisoners and there was 4 or 3 lifers, people who never get out.
Mm-hmm. And then one of them was this girl, and I remember she was like 18 years old, and she like killed her girlfriend and her boyfriend. No, she killed her mom and her boyfriend.
Maybe, yeah.
And then but she was like high on meth and stuff. And then she was like going to be in jail for the rest of her life. And so she was one of the 3.
Right. And so anyway, they became master trainers, dog trainers, and were certified. And they ran a program where they trained rescue dogs from the pound. And actually, breeders from around the country would send them. So, for example, there would be let's say an Australian Shepherd, for example. So a dog that's highly intelligent.
Yeah.
So they would have purebred. So breeder would, and then there would be one of the dogs would come out with like imperfect markings, like maybe a different color or something that then would be show quality.
Yeah.
So they would donate this dog to the prison program as a service dog.
Yeah.
And so they were a valuable dog. And so anyway, but I got to meet this woman named Sister Pauline Quinn. Mm-hmm. And she's a Catholic nun. She's in that, her habit and everything. Mm-hmm. And she travels around the world setting up prison dog programs to train service dogs, because a service dog is almost impossible to buy because because it takes, a service dog takes about 2 years of training before they can be. Yeah. And these dogs, and they would do a demonstration, the women prisoners that were training these dogs, which were amazing. Like, for example, the one that always impressed me was, there was two really. One was they would put a piece of steak in front of the dog, and the dog would put it right up against the dog's nose, and the dog wouldn't touch it until given the command. And the other thing that I always remember was they could pick up a dime off the concrete floor and hand it to you.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah. So they were trained for working with PTSD victims. So they weren't even as highly trained as, for example, a seeing eye dog or, but they would, they were designed for, the training was for people with PTSD and mobility problems. Mm. So they could brace. So that means if you had trouble getting out of your chair, you could say brace, and the dog would come over and you could pull on its harness, and then it would pull you up. What I always loved is they had one of the new dogs that was just getting involved in training, mm-hmm. and so the dog was really. I just remember this. They would say like brace, and the dog would turn the lights off. And the dogs would be trained to go into the refrigerator and pull out a water bottle and bring it to you.
Yeah.
So this dog would be like, you would say like, you give the command, and the dog would go and bring you a dime. So he had a lot of the skills now, but just didn't quite understand which one was which.
That's cute.
Yeah, it was funny. But anyway, Sister Pauline Quinn is, she's been to the Philippines, Argentina, so Europe, and people love these programs. It's such a win-win, and it's not expensive.
Yeah.
But the problem is that you had to have somebody, like in this case, the person who trained the trainers, the person who got the program going was a retired superintendent. Mm-hmm. So it was somebody that knew knew prison systems and stuff, and knew how to work with them, that was also a dog trainer.
Yeah.
So, and I don't know how that program is going now. They also have what are called cell dog programs.
Yeah.
See, this is an idea that I had, and nobody has given me any credit for this idea.
Okay.
I wanted to see if they could train reverse service dogs. So what the reverse service, let's say you're a sex offender and you're released from prison.
Okay.
So the dog would be trained that it would walk next to you, and if you walk near, let's say, a playground, it would. Let's say you were a block away from a playground, it would go. "Rrrr." And then if you kept walking in that direction, it would bite your ankle.
Oh, that's a good idea, actually.
I know. I thought it was
Okay. So what? So reverse dog training program.
a reverse service dog.
Reverse service. Okay.
This-
Actually, I don't think that doesn't make sense. I mean,
yeah.
you'd have like, because I mean, I think accountability, you'd have like a living, breathing thing that you're accountable to
Yeah.
that, you'd face consequences if.
Well, they have cell dog programs, which are not service dog. And I think about 4 or 5 of the Alaska prisons have this. Many do down south. And that is they take dogs that can't be adopted and they train them.
Okay.
So that means that they live with the prisoner.
Oh.
So the idea is that when you're an adoptee, so there's a lot of pit bulls and stuff. And
Yeah. Communists for parents. Do you want to get into that?
oh, sure.
Okay. What was it like having communists for parents?
Well, my dad was a member of the Communist Party of the United States. It's an interesting thing. And I'll just vent a little bit about this. So we talk about Russian collusion today with Trump and stuff like that. And, the thing is that when I grew up, my parents were ultra liberal and they loved Russia.
Yeah.
And Russia was always held up as an example, or it was the Soviet Union in the day, as an example. I remember my father telling me that he thought the USSR was a better country than the United States, better run. And so anyway, the Communist Party of the USA was openly funded by Moscow.
Okay.
So everybody's all upset today, but yet back in the day, it was. The Russians directly funded a political party in the United States.
Wow.
And it actually elected one person.
Who?
It was the mayor of, I believe this is true at least, it's the mayor of Bridgeport, Connecticut.
Ooh.
Was a communist.
Really?
Yeah, and I was reading up on him. I don't remember his name, but he was elected a number of times. But he was a communist, but he was a total conservative.
What?
So he lowered taxes and he was known for, so he was referred to as a sewer socialist because he was a socialist, but the sewers worked and the buses ran, and the city was well managed with non-political, but they didn't spend money they didn't have and they didn't spend it, they didn't waste it on stuff. And,
yeah, as long as that's,
and they had they were considered to be good government.
Yeah.
So,
that's what's important.
But anyway, so I had Gus Hall at my house one time, and he was the head of the Communist Party of the United States. This is in the 60s when that wasn't popular.
Okay.
And but I went and marched on Washington in 1968.
I love those photos of you.
Yes.
That's so funny.
And I was at the first Earth Day demonstration. I threw a rock at a car.
Good.
Because the cars were polluting.
Yes.
And then my ass ran and got a smog belching bus back to Queens. I was a little chicken shit.
Oh, we all are a little bit. Yeah. Oh gosh. That reminds me of me and Anya. Oh, okay. So me and Anya, remember when she and I, we threw stuff at these boys' houses, or at these boys in their house and stuff. And then they ran into the house to get their dad. Then Anya and I were on bikes. And so she and I were just took off on our bikes. And we had I'll never forget this, but Mom helped us hide our bikes.
Oh, I remember that.
Wasn't that nice? I remember that. She was just I don't
Well, let's just hide your bikes.
Yeah, she was just I don't know what you guys did. It probably wasn't that bad. Let's just get your bikes in the backyard. And we just went inside and just watched them in the back seat of their truck and stuff. The dad was driving and they were in the truck and stuff. It was totally Dukes of Hazzard. It was so
See,
funny.
my dad he had that technique. So the neighbors would occasionally complain about something I did. And then my dad I'd hear him at the door, at the front door. And he'd go God damn it, that fucking kid. I'm going to beat his ass as soon as I find him. Then he'd turn around when they'd leave and he'd roll his eyes and walk past me. So I always remember that. Yeah. So he was a communist and he was a professor of chemical engineering at City University in New York. And I remember when I was like 13 or 14, I noticed I pick up the mail, and he was always getting dividend checks from big corporation stock funds.
Okay.
So he was a bit of a capitalist. Well, he said something that interested me later. You know, when he was older and I was older, there's actually a lot of stuff I agreed with him. Like, he wasn't real big on the environmental movement. He was big on jobs and factories and people, keeping people employed, and as the way to get out of poverty. And so he thought the environmental movement was, and to some extent, the gay rights movement. I mean, it's not nice to say it now, but back in the time, my father saw it as privileged middle class people usurping African Americans.
Really?
Yeah, because he said that gay people had education and opportunities and stuff like that. So he thought it was bourgeois.
Oh.
He thought it was a bourgeois complaint.
Really?
Yeah. So he believed only the poor had the right to
complain,
seek justice. They should be at the front of the line. Should be so
he didn't care about identity. He just cared about poor people.
Yeah, he was very big into public housing and supporting housing and stuff like that.
Okay.
I mean, he was an atheist, so he wasn't a social conservative by any means, but he was a product of his day.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna go see his grave when I go back to New York.
Good.
On this drive around.
Just remember that scene from Radio Days.
Oh.
They're right. It's silly.
Oh, I know. That's Radio Days remains one of my favorite movies of all time.
So our Christmas movie is Radio Days.
Yes.
And we watch it every Christmas. And there's this scene where they're doing a Passover, and the neighbors, who are also Jewish,
but are communists,
who are not celebrating or who are not observing Passover, are listening to the radio.
Why should we stop eating just because of some invisible being? Some imaginary being in the sky. And then the guy comes back, they're right. Why should we? And then right at that moment, he gets a heart attack.
Hey, God is going to punish you.
I know.
Because he ate French fries.
No, he ate pork. He ate bacon. What did you have to eat? You probably ate there. You broke your fast. And he goes, we had some bacon. And, ham sandwiches. That's ham sandwiches. Yeah. See, when I was a kid, when I went to PS 33, the big thing was, were you Protestant or Catholic?
Yeah.
And then you separated into that group.
Mm-hmm.
And then I would say, my parents are atheists. And then both sides would come after you. But, I remember, this is really funny. It's like a real strong memory.
Yeah.
So we had a schoolyard, and we go out for recess, and there was there was a couple basketball hoops, but kids just milled around.
Yeah.
So the big thing was, there was this woman named Jean Dixon, and she was a psychic, and she predicted that California was going to fall into the ocean.
Okay.
With this massive earthquake. So she had the day and the time. I remember everybody was out of the thing waiting to see if California fell into the ocean. Then it didn't, of course.
Yeah.
And it was like, oh, that was the first great disappointment.
Aw.
Then I remember the day President Kennedy was assassinated. I was at PS 33, and I came out, and all the parents were lined up sobbing.
Why? I'm sorry. I know that's I know when the president, I know everyone loved him, but I honestly, I don't think.
Well, I'll tell you why.
Why?
Because it was the time of the Cold War.
Yeah.
People were really nervous.
But people are nervous now. I can't imagine anybody crying if Donald Trump.
No, it's a different age. But back then. So I remember being a kid in elementary school, coming out of 5th grade, and thinking oh, shit.
Yeah.
Something's going on. Let's just go play somewhere. But then it was President Kennedy got assassinated. I remember that. And I remember the moon landing. We
Yeah.
saw that movie the other night. I know exactly where I was in that. I was watching it live on TV.
We
at
went
my
to go see First Man
grandparents'
last
house.
night.
Yeah.
The moon landing.